So we've had a long and, in my view, a highly productive day. I hope everybody feels likewise. So most of what we talked about today so far is facts and analysis. We talked about how NAFTA came about. We talked about not just its inception and negotiation, but we've had several different takes on evaluating it and what the pros and cons were and who some losers were and how it helped modernize the Mexican economy and to some extent the Canadian economy. Now we're turning our attention to something that is perhaps a little more conjectural, but we have we've mentioned this a little bit about NAFTA's future, but of course it occurs in the context of trade discussions, debates, and initiatives such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TTIP, et cetera. And so we'd like to hear people's at least initial thoughts on what some of the lessons we think we've learned from NAFTA about the future of trade liberalization. You can refer specifically to these specific other trade agreements which are in the process of being negotiated, to other trade agreements which may be out there but are lagging, that have been negotiated but aren't working. Anything else you'd like to talk about, but just trying to see, are there lessons we can apply to trade liberalization? I would just make one point before turning it over to people who know more about this than I do, that in my view, the proper economic way to think about trade liberalization is the goalpost is always moving. That is, the goalpost, or the origin, if you're thinking about a chart. That is, when trade isn't being liberalized, there's great temptation and often effectuated special interest and other reasons why various types of barriers grow up like weeds, non-tariff barriers and the like. So if you're not liberalizing and dealing with all those things, gradually you recede, you fall back. So it's in that context that I think it's important to try to understand these things, not just for what they have to say per se about these other things. Okay. So Jaime, you want to lead off? You've got some slides you want to show.
Yes, I prepared some slides that, go a little bit to the effects of NAFTA in Mexico, because I think you have to have that in perspective when you think about the future of NAFTA. So if I may, if you can, I don't know how to change the... Oh, okay. Thank you. So the first thing is that trade liberalization, not only NAFTA, but trade liberalization in Mexico happened after we joined the GATT in 1986. And it had a profound effect. And the profound effect, and I might be getting a bit too technical here, but when I'm at Stanford, is that we changed the relative prices between importable goods and exportable goods. That is, what happened is when we were closed, a closed economy, it was not profitable.
Try to speak into the microphone if you can, so everybody can hear.
We had a distortion against exports in Mexico because we were protecting producers within the Mexican market. So all the producers in Mexico were much more oriented to supply the Mexican market than the foreign market because they were making money through the protection the margins. I ran this regression between non-oil exports in Mexico against US GDP, when the Americans grow, we export more, against the effective tariff we charge to our imports, and against the exchange rate with the dollar. The exchange rate to the dollar is irrelevant in the long term. The GDP in the US explains quite a bit, and a very good chunk of the growth of exports in Mexico, non-oil exports, is explained by the fact that we lowered tariffs, which is not something that people see immediately. So if you look at the vertical axis, is the effective average tariff Mexico charges to imports. And here is the growth, and the excess is the growth of the value of our non-oil exports. And you can see that the lower the tariffs we were charging in Mexico, the more we were exporting. This is a very important lesson for a country like Mexico and other Latin American countries that don't establish the link between opening the economy and exporting more. They say, when we lower tariffs, we're going to import more. But they don't go to the extra step showing that you export more. So this is a very profound change in Mexico. And it happened basically because of NAFTA. When you do some review of the time series, the main structural change in our exports behavior is with NAFTA. So I think that is one first profound or structural change in the Mexican economy. The second one is that we have a very high correlation now between Mexican GDP and particularly Mexican manufacturing production with US GDP or US manufacturing production, almost 1-to-1. Before NAFTA, the correlation was 0.21. After NAFTA, the correlation index was 0.76. And when you do some co-integration tests with some econometric techniques, you realize that it is explained basically by NAFTA. This had a profound effect in Mexico too, for the following reason. When Mexico was highly protected, what would happen is that as soon as, since people were producing for the domestic market and only exporting residually, our exports were residual. When we open up, exports stopped being residual and became the true engine of growth. Actually, it has been the most dynamic component of aggregate demand in Mexico since we introduced NAFTA. Has been growing much more than the other components of aggregate demand. When we were closed, what happened is if Mexico started growing, exports would go down because the Mexican market would take more products from Mexican producers that were making more money selling in Mexico than selling abroad. And at the same time, Mexico was importing more because we needed intermediate inputs. So whenever we started growing, we ended up always with a trade balance crisis and with a balance of payments crisis because our exports will be going down and our imports chronically going up, and we would reach a deficit that we could not finance, and then we had to devalue. And we went through periods like that time after time. Very traumatic. Professionally speaking, I went through one that was very traumatic for me. This has changed. Now exports and imports go very much with each other, and the trade balance in Mexico, which used to be a destabilization scheme, now it's a stabilization mechanism. So those two very profound changes had the following consequences. Our exports have been growing dramatically. If you look at the one to the left, tells you an index of how exports in the world has been growing with the red line, and how Mexican exports have been growing since '93, the year before NAFTA. And you can see that the gap between the green, the yellow, the blue and the red is increasing. So discounting the effect of world growth and exports, Mexico still made huge progress over that standard. And the second one is to the right, is per capita non-oil exports. We export, the average Mexican export more than the average Chinese. So a Mexican, on average, exports $2,600 per year. The Chinese is the green one. They export $1,500, which is something that people talk about China like the huge, and it's true but it's basically because of its size. But in terms of per capita exports, Mexico is way above every single BRIC country.
But isn't the case now that your labor costs are about the same?
I'll get to that. That's exactly one of the points. I'll get to that, George.
And your energy costs are less than your transportation, so you're very competitive.
I'll go to that. And that's why I think that is the sort of thing we have to look into for the future of NAFTA. But just look at the size of the exports. I decided to have daily exports. In 1993, Mexico exported $144 million per day. Today, Mexico exports more than $1 billion per day, which is, almost a 10 times increase. In non-oil is 123 against 883. So the impact of those two changes that I was referring to, relative prices of importables and exportables, and the coordination of the cycles, has resulted, among other things, in this huge growth of exports. FDI, foreign direct investment. Before NAFTA, we were receiving $2.9 billion per year. In that little period there, the average between 1980 and 93, it was $2.9 billion per year. Now we're receiving almost $20 billion per year. So we multiply by 10 again. So by 10, right? Yeah. So that gives you an idea of the sort of impact that those very dramatic changes in relative prices and coordination and stability in NAFTA has had. Now, I'm going to make the point that George was making. This is a study done by KPMG about how profitable is each industry in each country. So you see autos, electronics, and so on. What is in a sort of a scheme of comparable companies? The Chinese are the most competitive, have the largest profitability. The Indians are the second ones. Mexico is the third in the world. The US number 11 and Canada is number 9, almost across all the sectors. So it means that Mexico within NAFTA is the most competitive country for manufacturing, according to these numbers, after China and India. Now, let me add to that the fact that, here we go. That if you calculate, and somebody did this in a company called Alex Partners, that is a sort of a law and economics company, look at the landing cost of a product to the US market, the landing cost to the product in the US market. The Chinese, the straight line where it says 100, this is an index, is the US cost to serve its own market. The Chinese are the dotted line, and Mexican products are the blue line. So you can see that in 2010, we were lower than the Chinese to land a product in the US. And not only that, we are the number one competitive country to supply the US. But then when you look at the numbers that George was mentioning in his wonderful presentation, we have a scheme now with North America that is much more of a production sharing compared to China that is much more of a pure outsourcing mechanism. As George was saying, out of every dollar we export, 40 cents are American inputs, the Canadians 25 cents, the weighted average in NAFTA is 32 cents. So every single dollar that Canada and Mexico export to the US in combination includes 30% or 32 cents of American inputs. So that has transformed the region. It's not that we're selling things to each other. Now we're producing things jointly. And Mexico contributes with certain levels of competitiveness for the following reasons. The first one, and I won't elaborate much on that, we've been discussing, is the gas. The price of gas. On the blue line is the Henry Hub, that is North America. The red one is Indonesia, Japan. The black one is Russia. And you can see, and the energy experts here can tell us, but the gap is huge. We have the cheapest gas in the world by far, and it'll stay there for quite some time. The result is, as far as I know, Jim, shale gas, what has made this huge difference. So we have an advantage over Asian countries and over European countries is a very important and permanent advantage. The second one is the demographics, and George Schultz was also referring to the demographics, but here I do something a bit different. I have here on the left how the NAFTA pyramid, demographic pyramid looks like. The light blue is the US, the red is the Canadian added to the blue, and the green is the Mexican added to the blue and to the red. And you can see that we have a dependency ratio that is much more sustainable over time than the Chinese, which are the reference of competitiveness. The Chinese, because of the one-child policy, have a pyramid that is going in dramatically in the younger ages. And the graph underneath shows you what is going to happen to the labor force, that is people from 15 to 64 over the total. The North American blue line goes up, the Chinese red line comes down, starting in 2015 or 2014, which means that in terms of labor cost, we have a very important advantage vis-a-vis China. And I think that we'll have a very important advantage because of the lack of devaluation vis-a-vis Europe. So we have a energy advantage, a labor advantage.
Jaime, before,
Yes, sorry.
let me interject a point. China had this big decline in its fertility. And for a while, that was a dividend. They had an expanding labor force, a falling number of people the labor force had to support. That is now about to change, like throwing a switch. And all of a sudden, they're going to have a declining labor force and a rising number of people the labor force has to support. Furthermore, they've generated their productivity by moving people from rural areas to cities. And all of Chinese culture and history is that the safety net in China has been the family and the community. But people have been moved out of those places. They're in anonymous city places. So I think China is headed for some big problems. But it seems to me that Mexico, let alone ourselves, but in Mexico, you are having the same demographics as China, except you're about 20 years later.
Exactly.
So it's important for you and for us in NAFTA to think about that and say, what do we do now to mitigate the impact of this switch that's going to take place?
Yeah.
And be working at it. Because it's baked in the cake. You know it's going to happen. So we should be working at
The
it.
Chinese had just recently, I think, discussed or changed their one-child policy, right?
Yeah,
I think
in
they
a
are.
mild way, but it's too late. This is happening, and they can't. You
I
can't.
know.
This
Demographics take
demography, you
forever.
can't just change it like
No,
that.
It takes forever.
And it's very limited. If one of the couple is a single child,
Right.
then they may have a second child. So it's not just everyone.
Okay. So more in favor of this argument.
Yeah.
I think, but you're right. I mean, eventually we're going to run into that sort of phenomenon, and we need to work at it. But the point I'm making here is that when you look at Mexico offering you the most competitive products, and with the best energy in North America, and probably very competitive labor for quite some time, plus, if you look at this is transportation. This is a study done by a group called Rubin, Jeff, and Benjamin people. I don't know what they are. I'm very sorry. The calculation they did is the following, which I think it was very interesting. Transportation cost depends on the price of oil, heavily. So if you look at that graph on the top, the light blue is how much it would cost for the Chinese to send a 40-foot container to the U.S. East Coast. And the dark blue is how much it would cost for Mexico to send that same container to the U.S. At West Texas at $100, which is where we are right now, is right in the middle. You can see that it's almost 3 times what the Chinese have to pay. If you transform that into an equivalent tariff and add up the most favored nation tariff that the Americans charge, for a West Texas barrel at $100, we have an advantage between 12 and 15% over the Chinese to supply the Mexican market because of transportation costs only. And NAFTA, of course, because we don't have to pay the MFN tariff. So clearly, we are a very important source of competitiveness for the region. So I thought I had one on the environment, but I'm going to skip it. So let me then, with this background, the transformation of Mexico has been huge. We are the most competitive country to supply the U.S. market and probably the Canadian market. So we can contribute to the competitiveness of the area, And I think there are 3 issues that we need to face intelligently. And I agree with you, without creating a government that is just bureaucratic. But there are issues that I think have to be solved. One is the architecture of NAFTA. I think the architecture of NAFTA is going to change regardless of what we do because of the TPP negotiation and the TTIP negotiation. The TPP negotiation has two problems for NAFTA, in my opinion. The first one is that according to the Berna, or to the, I don't know if it's the Berna or the Geneva Agreement, a new trade agreement dominates over an older trade agreement. So if we end up the three countries of TPP, I mean the three countries of NAFTA in the TPP negotiation, we could pretty much end up with a TPP substituting NAFTA. Now, from the American perspective, it's not the same that the Vietnamese export a microphone to the US and it has 4% of their value, of its value in inputs coming from the US, as importing it from Mexico that has 40% of US value in its inputs. It's a different thing. Actually, most of the countries in TPP function as a pure outsourcing to the US market, while Canada and Mexico are much more integrated to the US. So the rational thing to do would be, in my opinion, that all the products that are generated in North America should be ruled with the NAFTA rules. And that is not being discussed. I remember being in Washington with you and Michael and Mike Froman, the USTR fellow, was saying that, you know, it's a very complicated thing. And so I don't see any leadership, true leadership, to think specifically about the consequences of TPP on NAFTA, and are not minor.
Could I ask you a question now?
Please.
A majority, 8, I think, of the countries that we're negotiating with in the TPP already have a free trade agreement with Mexico and with the United States. So that the problem that you suggest may be not as large because we already give them free access.
But with different rules. For instance, Carla.
Different rules of origin, which we could...
different rules. No, different rules of origin, and we accumulate, and that would be fine.
Different rules.
Different rules on the environment, and different rules on labor,
right,
and on safeguards.
Right.
And what has happened is that after we've ended up the negotiation with Mickey on labor and environment, the U.S. started incorporating all the labor and environment rules in the text of their trade agreements,
right,
with Chile and so on. So for Mexico now to go into, by the way, chapters that are part of the text and that jump into trade sanctions much more rapidly than in NAFTA. So if we were to lose, Mexico was to lose these NAFTA rules and adopt the TPP rules, we could see a new instrument of protectionism growing in this country against Mexican exports. That right now is not a huge risk because we have the rules of NAFTA. So we need to start thinking about these issues carefully. That's the first one. And the other disadvantage is that they are doing it, as we said this morning, without fast track. So, it's opening NAFTA to the cherry picking in Congress, which I think is very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Very dangerous. The second architecture issue, I think, is the European issue. We already have a free trade agreement with Europe. The Canadians almost are finished pretty much, and you guys in the US are going to start negotiating this free trade agreement. The natural thing, and Carla, Michael, and I wrote a little piece on that, would be to negotiate as a region versus region. That would make sense for everybody, even for the Europeans, because you get rid of all the spaghetti ball of the rules of origin and so on. So the US has not reacted well to the proposal. Mike Froman thinks that this is too complicated, and at this point I don't think that is possible anymore. But however, I think that we have a solution to that, or a potential solution, that also requires some serious thinking, that is to have a rule for convergence of the three agreements with Europe. And at the end of 5 years or so, make sure that the three agreements that we have, the Canadians, the Mexicans, and the new American, converge into one agreement. But those things require some serious thinking, some serious dialogue, some serious leadership, and I don't see it so far. The second big issue for me in the future of NAFTA is the labor mobility issue. I think that the migration issue has to be addressed by something that Kenneth Arrow defined very well in his game theory in theorems. And there is one I remember talking to him about this issue many years ago while I was visiting here. If you make the entry into a market a difficult entry, you make the exit of the market very difficult. Because the economic agent that manages to enter doesn't want to leave the market. So the more difficult the U.S. makes for Mexicans to come and work in the U.S., the more difficult is making the Mexicans going back to Mexico because they don't want to lose the advantage they got or the opportunity they got. So instead of approaching labor mobility with a bill that is basically concentrated in the existing stock of Mexicans in the U.S., around 12 million people, which is something that has to be done, that should be complemented with some agreement on labor mobility that helps us take advantage of the demographics of the region and increase the competitiveness of the three countries. And finally, the energy, I'll finish with this. Hopefully today or tomorrow or in the next few weeks, we'll have some more reasonable regulation in Mexico that will allow us with time to have an energy agreement in North America, which would be absolutely rational, and which will give us, in my view, a very important competitive advantage vis-a-vis the rest of the world. I'll stop there.
Thanks.
Let me raise a question with you on the labor mobility side. Given the demographics and the prospect of an improved Mexican economy, shouldn't we expect a very small amount of immigration from Mexico to the U.S.?
I think that the recent decline of Mexicans coming into the U.S. is more explained by the slowdown of the American economy, particularly in construction, than by demographics. But you are right, eventually the demographics will go there. So your point is very important because if the U.S. government is to decide to allow for a labor mobility scheme with the Canadians and with the Mexicans, the flows are not as gigantic as they were in the past. And that might facilitate things. And they'll be going down. But the point here is, I think that the current decrease in migration is explained more by the decline of construction here than by the demographics. But you're right, in the long term, the demographics is going to help because it's going to go down.
But it seems to me we have a big stake in getting better control of your southern border.
Yeah, well,
It's basically just an open border.
yep.
So the U.S.-Mexico border is going to have a lot of non-Mexicans
Yes.
who constitute the illegal immigration problem.
Yep.
So we should focus on that.
Absolutely right. I agree absolutely with you. It's a tough one, eh? That border is very weird. Because of the geography of the border, the lack of institutions, corruption and so on. So our southern border with Guatemala and Belize is a disaster. We have to work at it.
Is there anything that America can do to assist there, or is this looking a little too much like American? Is there anything America can do to assist in that?
Yes, I think so. I think we have to sit down and think about the NAFTA borders, not the Mexico-U.S. borders. And I think you mentioned this today. The immigration issue is not on the border with Mexico. The immigration issue is in the south border of Mexico. You are absolutely right. We need to figure out how to do it intelligently, and it's basically investment in infrastructure. Basically.
Long ago, we had a program where Mexicans could come in. I think it was called the Bracero program.
Yeah.
And they could work and then go home to their families. We've made it so difficult for them to go back that now, because of the lack of jobs, they don't want to come. I think that in answer to George's question, it's lack of jobs, the danger and difficulty of coming across the border because you can't get back. That has really made the net immigration from Mexico today zero. And actually, it's hurting many sectors, particularly the agriculture sector, in our country.
I don't think it's so difficult to get back, but you don't want to go back because it's so difficult to get back in again.
That's
the
in and out.
That's the point.
George, I have to say from an agricultural standpoint, we're finding that this is a fairly broad spread survey, both Napa, Sonoma, all the different crops that are grown in the North Coast. Those who are citizens, their intent They go back home for at least a month every year, some of them for 2 months. Their intent is not to retire in the United States, but to retire permanently in Mexico. And we don't seem to recognize it.
It's incredible. You're so right, Frank.
We have
They want-
exactly the same experience up at our ranch.
They want to build a little house. They want to send a refrigerator to their mother. They want to buy a TV for their family. That's what they want to do. That's why they come here and work and get money and would like to go back and improve the standard of living in Mexico. But we don't let them. Because when they go back, they say, Dad, this is the only, this was my only chance. So I think the policy has been completely wrong.
I do
It's
too.
actually, and one of the big puzzles that we worry about in immigration is why is each cohort of immigrants worse off than before? It's partly because we miss, once you control for the fact that there's two types of immigrants, those who are coming to live here forever and those who want to go back home. So after those cohort deteriorations are much less severe than we realize.
Yeah.
So that is a very important distinction for thinking also socially about how, about immigrant life in the U.S. and in Canada.
I don't spend any time in Washington, so I don't know quite what goes on there, but my impression is that the people in Washington don't even grasp this kind of thing conceptually, let alone be willing to do it. They don't even understand the problem.
Don't you, but George, don't you think they understand it all too well, which is you're going to change the political equilibrium once you're going to change who's voting, and there must be people in Washington who don't like the way it's going.
No, I don't think that's correct.
I think
How much more?
I think that there, after this election, there's an opportunity for immigration reform that would ask everybody who's here illegally not to leave, but to wait for anything like citizenship. They could get some card that lets them stay. We can have a guest worker program, expanded H-1B visas, but enables them to go back and forth and so on, but allows them to become citizens or have a path to citizenship only after people who have waited in line legally until that has cleared. And that's going to be some long years. And I think that's probably, if there is going to be some serious immigration reform, that's going to happen. I think it's been dealt a very big blow, of all things, by the implosion of the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, because both on substantive grounds and on a way to hide behind fear, it's just increasingly implausible for Republicans to entrust border enforcement, which they're very nervous about. We can argue whether it should be enforced, but that's kind of a sine qua non for most Republicans to support it. It seems to me that they were that they're going to be just very dubious. They were dubious that the Obama administration would want to enforce it, but now I think that the competence of the administration has been called so into question by this that I think it's basically, this has been put major immigration reform on the back burner for a while till this comes down.
But Michael, it seems to me that the citizenship issue is not really the problem. A green card, in a way, is better. And a large proportion of these people don't even want citizenship. They want to be able to go back to Mexico and come back and forth. That's what they want.
Exactly. I was just responding to Dan's worry about Republicans worried that we'll get 12 million more Democrats voting and so on, which would be a real concern. But I agree with you, the number will be much smaller for all those reasons. And I think it will be, if it's ever dealt with in a way, I think that the way I suggested would be an option of moving to citizenship after this is cleared. In the meantime, you get a green card, that's what most people, or something like it. That's what most people want, I think. It's a big problem for many of our businesses who want workers and increasingly have a difficult time there's a short-run recession and sluggish economy aspect to this, but have increasingly had a difficult time. Carla, you referenced the Prosero program, but something like a serious guest worker.
The Canadian experience was good, no, Michael? With visiting workers from Mexico into Canada.
Yeah, that's working.
Well, because there's
Yeah, go ahead.
Because there's a very specific requirement on the people who are receiving the seasonal workers to follow certain rules, and if they don't follow the rules, they don't get the opportunity to do it again. So there's quite a discipline there.
It is a political issue now. First, there was, as you know, we re-established a visa requirement for Mexicans because of refugee status. Yeah, and I'm sure, and then the other is that the whole temporary workers program is hugely under fire right now and will be scaled back. That's my picture of it, at least. I mean, it's a very large program, so even scaling back is not disastrous.
But it can work.
But it can work, yes.
I had a question up there.
Yes, yes. My name is Salvador Avila. Let me introduce real briefly myself. While these brilliant people were negotiating and designing, all of you, what turned out to be a visionary thing for North America, I was Undersecretary for Industrial Development in Chihuahua State, in northern Mexico. Arguably one of the states who was highly benefited by NAFTA. In a few years, Chihuahua created 250,000 industrial jobs. So, that was a net result of the agreement. However, I was listening to the table today, and I heard Mary saying that in the United States, SMEs, small and medium enterprises, are the main provider of jobs.
No, that was Carla.
Okay, such is the case.
Yes.
Such is the case for Mexico, by the way, except Chihuahua. Chihuahua is the other way around. The big companies provide most of the jobs. And I want to ask the table this: NAFTA going forward, is there a way that we could provide mechanism, or more than that, is there a leadership, as visionary as you were in those times, as to make sure that those better jobs, better pay that Mr. Schultz was addressing a while ago, are going to be into place? And I'm going to finish with this. The maquiladora industry, after 20, 30 years in the country, has turned out to have only a 3% of local integration. This is, Mexican companies are only integrated in the supply chains of the maquiladora, only at 3%. And such is the fear also, by the way, in the Pemex and the supply rights for the oil industry. It turns out that I'm involved in that sector right now, trying to develop a way for Mexican companies to become, in this energy reform that is coming, to push the SMEs, the Mexican SMEs, to be able to provide better jobs and better well-paid for the local regions that are oil producing. I just finished saying that one of the main problems there, and I think we have faced strong opposition, is from the regions, local regions, that haven't really benefited where the oil is being extracted, that haven't really benefited by Pemex extracting the oil. So is there, a way that the three countries could come together and assure that the wealth or the benefit is going to be distributed in a more successful way?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, the maquiladora disappeared with NAFTA in the 7th year. Yes. People keep talking about maquiladora, and the maquiladora in the formal sense doesn't exist anymore. And I think this result of a very low content of Mexican inputs in Mexican exports to the U.S., which in the maquiladora is 3%, but in the nation must be less than 10. You're right, it's low. Comes from the maquiladora program. The maquiladora program was introduced sometime in the 60s or the late 60s, early 70s. And what happened is that the government did not want to open the economy. They just wanted to open the border. So they created the maquiladora scheme, which basically meant that you could get a duty drawback. You could import something, transform it and send it back, and you would get the tariff you paid to import something back. And the only condition is that you didn't sell the product in Mexico. You could not pass that benefit to the Mexican consumer. That is the design of the maquiladora. It's a crazy scheme, right? But it's because many investors wanted to invest in Mexico and say, well, how do we do that without opening up? Create that little thing that is called maquiladora, and it grew dramatically. What happened is that the traditional exporters in Mexico did not know anything about the Mexican market, neither suppliers nor consumers, because they were not allowed to sell to Mexicans. And second, they didn't have any incentive in looking for some Mexican suppliers because they were getting the benefit of a zero tariff. So the whole culture of Mexican exports grew around that program, which has led to this phenomenon. I think time is going to take care of it, and it's taking care of it. But you're asking if we could accelerate that process. It's kind of difficult for me to figure out how to do it.
As a bloc, Mr. Serra-Puche,
What?
As a bloc being able, we have been discussing as a bloc, as a North American bloc, detecting, strategic, productive chains, value-added chains, and maybe working them as a bloc, as the three countries aligned.
It has to be the companies.
That was my question. I know, difficult one.
So there is, one of the blocks to economic growth in Mexico is scarcity of credit for commercial purposes. So if you look at the share of Mexican GDP that is private credit to private firms, it's basically at Honduran levels. It's the
Low.
Mexico has an extremely small banking system, and always has, except for the boom of 91, 94, we know how that ended. And the fundamental problem, it's not an ownership issue because the banks are now all foreign owned. So the fundamental problem is a property rights problem, how to enforce contracts in a country in which institutions, judicial institutions, are quite weak. And so since most small, medium manufacturers rely on bank credit for working capital, the absence of bank credit for them is a big impediment. And I don't know that that's a problem that can be solved trilaterally. That's a problem that my sense is that Mexico is working on, but it's a very slow process.
It's a slow process. We have a program with our development bank called NAFINSA that provides guarantees for small and medium firms. So the private banks, the commercial banks get support from the development bank in case the small and medium firm doesn't pay. But that is, tiny compared to the needs. So that's one of the issues, but not only that. I mean, government procurement is highly corrupted, so firms cannot grow on that one. The energy issue is gonna really open up options, and I don't think too many small and medium firms are gonna take them because they are not prepared. Technologically, they are lagging dramatically. So it's an issue that I think it's difficult to try to incorporate a solution in NAFTA or in a NAFTA plus or in the future of NAFTA. I don't mean to ignore it, but I don't see how NAFTA could deal, or the NAFTA plus or NAFTA 2.0 could deal with it. I need to think about that.
Let me ask Michael and Carla next if there's anything they'd like to say about lessons from NAFTA for trade liberalization in general, for the future of NAFTA, for these other things.
Little deck here, I can go quickly through
Go ahead.
that.
No, here. Carla.
Oh.
The first, I'm not going to spend much time on this because Jaime has addressed this, but I guess the basic point is that while the natural step might be to move to try to integrate the TPP and the European negotiation into NAFTA, there doesn't seem to be the support or the enthusiasm from USTR. So my only comment here is that if we could get started on having a dialogue among the three countries as to how that might occur, rather than taking any steps or expecting steps to be taken, but at least start to put the building blocks in place, that might be a helpful start. But I recognize that is...
I would encourage you to push harder, but go ahead.
Yeah. I'm not in a position to push, but I'll...
No, but I mean the two governments.
Yeah. So what I have done here, I've said there are a number of policy areas that we can look to where some work is going on right now, but further progress is possible. And I suggest this because I think it's important, picking up, George, on the North American region and the importance of bringing people together. The more we talk about things in a range of issues, and I've got this range on the board here, the more we start thinking as a region, and particularly in the policy-making area. So the first is border management. There has been a strategic dialogue between the United States and both Mexico and Canada that's been underway for a while. Further progress clearly is possible, and there may be maybe it's more possible now on a trilateral basis than it has been on a bilateral basis in the past. And I just set out here in that activities to date. There's cooperation. We've got a steering committee. Mexico's got a committee as well. But addressing threats early, trade facilitation, cross-border activity, IBETs and ship riders are two bilateral approaches. I can describe what they are if people are interested. And looking at critical infrastructure and cybersecurity. We have harmonized inspection of air passenger traffic or baggage, and we're looking at new approaches on border clearance. There's a border infrastructure plan, investment plan that I think is important. And as I say, there are similar things that are happening with Mexico that Jaime may want to develop. But on the future progress, the whole approach here is to move the management of the border away from the physical border so that bottlenecks at the border can be managed better. And one of the things I put here is cleared once, accepted twice. That means that if something is cleared in Vancouver, Montreal, or at an airport in Canada, it doesn't have to be cleared again going into the United States market. One of the questions that we have in Canada on this is these are all pilot programs. It's really whether the interests within the U.S. bureaucracy are going to accept these on a permanent basis and bring them to scale. And then I say, there may be possibilities of bringing the Canada-U.S. and the Mexico-U.S. discussions together and having more of a trilateral dialogue. And to that, I'd add, picking up on a point I think George and Jaime made earlier, is maybe talking more than we have been about that southern border of Mexico to see whether there are things that might be done there. On regulatory reform, I just touched on this in an earlier comment. We've got councils in both countries working on this. There is a high-level activity being undertaken here. The President Obama, has issued an executive order authorizing the identity and elimination of unnecessary regulatory differences. I saw this happening when I was in Washington. It didn't really take hold, but it's certainly something that should be pushed as hard as possible. There has been good progress here, and hopefully that can continue. I should say that the agreement between President Obama and Prime Minister Mulroney on border management. Excuse me, I was wishing. Harper, Prime Minister Harper is doing some good work quietly. We haven't had a whole lot of high-level announcements on it, but there is good progress underway there. Future progress on regulatory reform, again, bring the two councils together, share best practices, and see whether there are ways that we can do things jointly. And clearly there's an opportunity here to improve competitiveness, both in the manufacturer and the retail side. The third area is in the energy and climate change area. I won't elaborate further on this. The ironic thing is, if you look at that little box in the lower left, the President and the Prime Minister, and both Presidents and the Prime Minister agreed on increasing North American energy trade. We commit our governments to work with all stakeholders to deepen such cooperation. We support coordinated efforts in everything but the Keystone XL pipeline. Further progress opportunities here: unconventional resources, infrastructure, energy efficiency, environmental awareness. And one of the things that just mentioned to Michael is, based on our earlier discussion, that there might well be room for a three-country discussion of the existing energy resource that we have on a North American basis, and understanding the nature of the decline of the resource, so that that can start to guide decision-making, particularly on the regulatory side. But again, high-level dialogue is important here. Pandemic disease. There has been a North American-wide plan on avian pandemic influenza, starting from the SARS problems we had a few years back. Work done on preparedness and response capabilities. There are border issues, as we saw. People were stopped at the border during the SARS epidemic, and people have been working on that, developing the guiding principles. But future progress here, I've underlined some of these again: prevention, mitigation, further work on preparedness and response, and also of recovery. The final area that I've identified is defense and security. Both Canada and the United States have been helping Mexico reduce the criminal activity that involves both training, information sharing. While we are further away from the U.S.-Mexico border, it's certainly something that we are concerned about, because we see signs of this creeping further north. So there's support here on the legal side and legal training that I think has been helpful. There's the Merida Initiative between the U.S. and Mexico, and the training that I touched on a minute ago. Further progress here is just, I think, deepening the trilateral commitment to fighting transnational crime and the different aspects of that, improving collaboration.
Very heavily tied into the drug issue that I talked about earlier.
Improving communication and collaboration among our three countries, and focusing clearly on the drug issue. And you can see some progress that has been made there in that bar chart in the bottom of the significant increase in high-level individuals being extradited to the United States. So, conclusion, it may be difficult getting progress, the progress that we'd like to see on the trade side, but there are these other areas that we can work on. Again, just to underscore what I said before, we should be, as Canada and Mexico, pushing as hard as we can to avoid provisions in either the European or the TPP, which will undermine the strength and the successes that we've had with NAFTA. Explore whether there's ways that we can integrate these two agreements with NAFTA. And just to conclude, I've identified these 5 areas as ways that we can continue working, thinking as a region, and in that way start getting a greater understanding of the benefits, some clearly the ones that we've been talking about during the discussions we've had today.
Great, Michael. Carla, you want to add anything about lessons from NAFTA? and
Well,
where
let
to
me
go?
compliment you on the conference. I think you've done a great job and it's been informative. I know we're out of time, but let me just say, I agree with some of these concepts that have been put on the table, but if we want to build upon the NAFTA, we're going to have to take action and activate the business sector, the media, and tell them what the facts are. We can't just say we need high-level meetings. High-level meetings come because of pressure from behind. And I dare say that the great majority of our elected leaders, including our president, do not have a clue of what the NAFTA has brought to us and what it could bring to us in the future. You know, it has created a market of $19 trillion and 460 million consumers, and he wants to double exports? Let's look at the market. And the fact is that the activity between our three nations has simply exploded in the past and could grow dramatically in the future. We need to talk about that. Today, Canada is our single largest export market. Mexico is our second single largest export market. Yes, the 28 states of Europe are larger, but you know, we sell more to Mexico than we sell to the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. We sell more to Mexico than we sell to the rest of Latin America. We sell more to Mexico than we sell to France, Britain, Germany, and the Netherlands combined. Americans don't know that. And goodness knows our elected leaders don't know it. And you want to double exports? Well, it's pretty close at home that there's some steps we could take. And so I kind of get despairing when I think, well, we can't do that because our leaders are not doing this. I think that we ought to take advantage of what we have created and build on it and talk about it. And could we improve upon the NAFTA? Yeah, we could move on these areas that Michael has eloquently talked about, but they won't be dealt with unless we activate the leadership. And I happen to personally believe that we ought to fight for getting our North American partners into the transatlantic investment, the TTIP. I believe that there are reasons you could talk to the leadership about why they should be in, and it would be in the United States interest. One is it would strengthen the transatlantic arrangement by adding 150 million consumers and $3 trillion, therefore giving the agreement more heft and more opportunity. Secondly, it would reduce the complexity that would occur if our two neighbors don't join, because Mexico has a trade agreement with Europe, and Canada has concluded one, and it undoubtedly will come into force after a good delay, but they concluded one in October. And if our entrepreneurs, whether they be small or large, have to face 3 different trade rules of origin and border red tape, this is going to be not the kind of an agreement that the United States wants. And I think that thirdly, having the 3 North American governments participate would provide an opportunity to enhance regulatory coherence. You talk about border management with having goods brought in. We don't even have the same customs form. I can't go to Mexico and use the same customs form throughout North America. And that's just me, one person. What about a truckload of goods? We really have built structures that impede our building upon the North American Free Trade Agreement. We need to get rid of that, but it's not going to happen to say, well, the leaders have to get together. The media, business, Hoover Institute have to sell it, and you have to sell it hard. This is as hard as getting fast-tracked 20 years ago, and maybe harder, because our elected leaders are so polarized. But this could bring them together, and it could be a terrific advantage for Mexico, for Canada, and for us. And there's another reason we should do this, and that would facilitate the President Peña's efforts to liberalize and transform the economy in Mexico, which is something the United States wants and would benefit from, because he could do what President Salinas did. He could use it as an umbrella to protect him from, why are you doing this? It's because I am joining a mega agreement. Can you imagine? I'm joining an agreement that involves more than 50% of world trade. Look at the advantages for Mexico. So of course we've got to liberalize telecommunications, energy, labor, and the like. And this is for the benefit not only of Mexico, but for all of North America. So I think as we move forward in the 21st century and we think, what should the trade issues be? We should identify the goal and really fight for it. And I think that this conference, and I know, Michael, you're going to pick up the cudgels and push this across the finish line.
I've been taking direction from Carla for a long time, so I stand on notice. George, we're going to let you ask any questions, but also see if you wanted to add anything and wrap it
I
up.
want to add one thing only. I nominate Carla Hills for president.
Well, thank you all very much. You've earned the cocktails and dinner. It's meant to be very informal. We'll go down to the hallway here where there'll be some cocktail tables set up. You'll see the dining facilities beyond it, room 115, where we'll have dinner. Several spouses are coming to join us. I know my wife is very anxious to see Rod and Carla, who she hasn't seen in a long time. So we'll very much look forward to that. And thank you all once again. Let me just add that, remember, this is the first part. The second part is producing a volume. That may sound very academic, but I do think it can be very useful in a variety of ways. It can be useful for some of the purposes Carla just mentioned. It can be useful educationally, not just as a history, but as a teaching device in our colleges and universities, everything from Latin American studies or North American studies to teaching trade and so on. So I'm very hopeful that I can count on your, when you finally get an edited version from me, which I hope won't be too challenged by the dual microphones, that you can fairly expeditiously turn that around to your satisfaction. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Michael.
And again, thanks to the staff for all the help.